Hey guys, Brent Hull Build Show. Talking today from an historic house in Carrollton, Texas. We're about 45 minutes from Fort Worth, but let me show you this great house today on the Build Show. Okay, so we're standing here in front of this house, right? And as the house sleuther, as you're trying to figure out when it was built, right? There's a lot of different clues. Now, vernacular architecture, what does that mean? And I bring that up because as you start looking at this house and trying to figure out when it was built, you have to understand what vernacular architecture is, okay? So vernacular means common, right? It means sometimes you're used in the common language, the vernacular language. In architecture, it means kind of simple, okay? Now, farmhouses in Texas, you know, they were here in the 1850s. This is built in 1909. Vernacular typically means it widens the range of when something will be available and when something was built. In 1909 in Fort Worth, Texas, this house most likely would not have been built. It would have been a bungalow, okay? Because the arts and crafts movement is really 1900 to 1920. To 1909 to have a kind of a Queen Anne-ish, Victorian-ish house, right? With some of this decoration that you're seeing, and you're gonna see a mix of decoration. We've got Ionic columns on the front porch, and we've got this arts and crafts bungalow colonnade in the entry. So it's a mix of different things. And so this vernacular architecture, when you're describing a house as vernacular, meaning it's a little bit common, it's a little bit of a mix of different styles, and it's typical for farmhouses. The farther you get out from the city, right, the more you'll see vernacular architecture. So this family, okay, arrived here in the 1850s. They built this house in 1909, big family, 14 kids out of that original small house, right? But there's a barn here, there's a smokehouse, there's a bunch of different, root cellar on the side. You'll see that this was a working farm, right? This is what it looked like. Now remember, Texas, the Alamos in 1836, we become a state in 1845, and they're here in 1850, right? So Texas opens up. Literally, there would have still been concern about Indians in the 1850s here. So pretty rustic, pretty rural, early settlers, and then this is their second house. This is the family house. This is the rich guy's house when they finally made it. So the other thing that happens here is that the railroad would have been a very influential piece of how this house gets put together. The railroad goes to Fort Worth in 1876, right? And so, the railroad isn't even here in the 1850s. They came out in wagons, right? They didn't come out on the railroad. Railroad arrives here, and it allows for a lot of the things that you're seeing on this house, the columns and the different pieces and parts, furniture even, that wouldn't have been available locally would have come on a railroad. Let's start looking at the individual parts and pieces, right? We see this great front porch here, and you see those, it's called a Scamozzi Ionic column, okay? It means that those Ionic columns kind of come out at a 45-degree angle, right? So you got an Ionic column here. Now, that really speaks to that more decorative Victorian era, right? The arts and crafts was simple, is a rejection of all that ornamentation. So again, we're seeing this mix of different styles. The wood front porch, look at the dog-eared cedar shingles up in that gable end, and the windows too. The windows, if you just dated this house just from millwork catalog, you would say it's 1910, right? Because those windows are available with that small transom window above, and then the simple window, bigger window below, right? We talked about glass sizes in our window shop. Look how big those pieces of glass are, right? This is a much later period where we could get bigger pieces of glass. So the oval in the door there, that's something from the Victorian millwork catalogs. You really don't see it much later. So again, vernacular, a mix of these different styles. They're out in the country. They're not cutting edge out here. And so we see a mix. The last kind of Victorian piece you see is the cresting on the roof, right? This cresting was a decorative detail, right? That you would have put onto a roof in the Victorian period as a decorative piece, right? It wasn't there for function, it was decoration. Now that's exactly what the arts and crafts people would have thrown out and not really cared about. And so again, we've got this remembering of the past here and what was happening, what these people were thinking as they were building this house. All right, so we're here because we're looking at, they are trying to raise money for a number of projects that they have. And part of this sleuthing that you got to do on this old house is what is original and what isn't. Like this lattice here at the bottom, right, that is not original, right? They're going to replace that and take that away. And there's been things that this house is, 110 years old, 112 years old, that have been added over time. If you see rotted wood like we see over there, right, we know that because of the good wood, right, historically good wood doesn't rot like that. So we know that there's been replacements. Look at this kind of detail here, right? This is not an original column, okay? I know that because of this detail right here. That's a typical builder's column. But this capital is, okay? This is that Scamozzi Ionic, right? And so the Ionic scrolls, right? But they're kicked out at a 45-degree angle. You see an egg and dart in there. It's actually kind of a pretty capital, but this is Victorian, right? This is not arts and crafts. Now, if we go inside, we're looking at this door. See this decoration around here? This faux egg and dart? This is an embossed molding, okay, meaning it's been pressed in, and it's been heated by iron that was pressed in. This decorative oval detail right out of the Victorian millwork catalogs. Come on, let's go inside. All right, so we're in the entry hall, and we have this Victorian door we're looking at, and then we have this colonnade here, right? A colonnade is a pretty typical arts and crafts detail. You see them in the catalogs from the late Victorian period, right? More decorative, and then you start to see these kind of more arts and crafts things, right? And our door header, look at this door header, right? Late Victorian, early arts and crafts, right? Pretty common in this house. But the way this is made, it's very simple, okay? The wallpaper, there's wallpaper throughout this house, and that would have been pretty typical, okay? This is a William Morris paper. It's probably wouldn't have been here, but they're still trying to figure that out. But the fact that you got wallpaper on the ceilings and on the walls is what would have been done, okay? Then this light, and this would have been something that you would have adjusted the height of the flame, right? Remember, just an open flame going on to light things up. But that would have been how they adjusted the light here. Would have been a very cutting edge thing. 1909 in Fort Worth, right? We would see them in the 1890s, right? Out here, 1909, again, that we see these things a little bit slipped, even though we're only 30, 45 miles from Fort Worth. Going into this main living room, right? And so again, you see this wallpaper, this trim at the ceiling, the top, wallpaper on the ceiling is pretty typical because remember, this is pre-drywall, right? You don't have any plaster walls out here, right? So no drywall. It would have been plaster if we'd have been in a city house, right? But in a simple house like this on the farm, all the walls are sheathed with just big wide boards, okay? They would have put cheesecloth and then they would have put the wallpaper right on top of this. Notice the door here is a 5-panel door. It's a little bit late for this era. Typically in 1909 you have a single panel and 2-panel doors. So we've got a great pocket door here that opens and closes. Would have been a division between the 2 rooms. So great example. If I'm just standing here, just looking at this house, I think and I'm in Fort Worth, this is an 1890s house. But now we're out in Carrollton, 1909. So you see how these styles vary and how this millwork and stuff like that will appear something different in Fort Worth than even out here, maybe a 20-year difference. That's what's part of that vernacular architecture and styling. I typically don't like tall bases, but look how tall this base is. It's at least a foot tall. Now remember from my Victorian videos, I talk about how Victorian bases are much taller with this big tall plinth, right? So we've got a plinth block, a big tall base, and then that flat casing, right? This isn't an ornamented casing. You have a back band or a base cap sitting on top of there, but all these moldings are flat and plain, right? So again, this mix of straight Victorian, you might see a decorative face here, but this is a mix between that arts and crafts and Victorian. So in the dining room, we've got this awesome built-in, okay? So this built-in has these great doors down below, this great hardware, okay? There originally was a mutton bar that went across here. You can see just the outlines for that mutton bar that would have driven it across, just like that colonnade in the front. This isn't one of the more beautiful built-ins that you had seen in the millwork catalogs, but it's an example of what would have shown up on a farm in 1909. So they're putting together this kitchen, right? You see an ice box here. You see this old stove, the way they would have done it. But here's that, gas light I was talking about, which is amazing to me. You see this gas, pipe coming down, going across, and then of course this lighter here, you'd adjusted the flame, right? This would have been pretty cool, right? For the neighbors, right? Come over, we just got our gas lights in, right? Ugh. Anyway, kind of a fun thing to think about. As I was saying, these guys are a prominent family. This is this. separated by about 110 years, right? Because they were prominent, because they were a family of means, right? Think about the gas lights. They had a phone, right? One of only 4 people in the area to have a phone on a party line, right? But you know, this is how communication happened. No Instagram here, but this is, you know, a sign of their wealth, a sign of changing technology, 1909. So we're on the back of the house now, right? And you'll see the original rock foundation. You see the barn in the background, windmill, root cellar, smokehouse, all the different things that have been, you know, popular in a farm. Now, one of the things we're going to be looking at fixing is this back beam here on this back porch. And you see there's a little bit of a sway in there. I think there's 4 to 5 inches of sway in there. Sometimes we'll go into these old houses, especially in this period between 1890 and 1940 even, right? Framing technology and standards in framing weren't really there, all right? We've gone into old houses and there's no header above doors and windows, right? And there's just a big sag there. 2x4s in the ceiling spanning 20 feet in a bedroom, right? With plaster hanging on top of it wasn't uncommon, where today that would be a 2x10, right? So the understanding of like the weight that framing could handle wasn't there. And the same thing is true with this porch header, right? Is that today we have an LVL in there, might even have a steel beam in there supporting that long of a span, right? They typically didn't. And so one of the things that we'll price is raising that up, putting something very stiff like an LVL in there or something strong in there, and then resetting this porch. So guys, vernacular architecture, right? What is that? You know, this blend of styles, things that are outside of the city that might be a little bit different, lagging in details. A lot of time sleuthing here, right? Because you look at those column capitals and you think, you know, totally Victorian, but then you go inside and see that colonnade and the moldings, you go, okay, this is arts and crafts, right? There's time sleuthing things that are going on here. Some of the cutting edge technology they've got, the telephone, the gas lights, all great stuff. Hopefully you learned a lot. Be sure to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Home Millwork, Hull Homes. I'm Brent Hull. Thanks for watching.